Imagine that you're a parent. If you already are one, then congratulations, this should be easy. It's a Saturday. You've just finished cooking dinner, but your son's not back from soccer practice. It's no big deal. He and his friends ride their bikes home from practice, and they often get sidetracked like kids do, so you just put the food in the oven to keep it warm. But then an hour passes, then 2 hours, then it's dark. Still nothing. Now you're getting concerned. You start calling the parents of his team members, and they all say the same thing. Their kids aren't back either. And now it's raining. Word starts to spread from one of the kids who did actually make it home that they had planned to go and stop by a local cave after practice. One of the kids had a birthday that day, and it's something of a local tradition for kids to write their names on the wall of the cave on their birthday. So you and a handful of parents go down to the cave to check on him. And when you get there, through the rain and the dark of night, you find their bikes laying there on the ground, along with their bags and a couple pair of soccer cleats. And at the mouth of the cave, you see water rushing in. Lots of water. And it hits you. You can't get in there. And they can't get out. This is exactly what happened to the parents of 12 children and their soccer coach on the night of June 23, 2018, in Thailand's Chiang Rai province. The rescue that followed took 18 days, involved over 10,000 people, and captured the attention of the entire world. Chances are you remember it. It wasn't that long ago, and it was a huge news story. But the details of this mission are absolutely insane and require techniques that had never been tried before. It's a story of ingenuity, resilience, and bravery and sacrifice, and maybe even make you believe in miracles. The Tham Luang cave is the fourth largest cave in Thailand. It extends over 10 kilometers that we know of, and it goes down 220 meters deep. And it holds a special place in the lore of northern Thailand. The locals actually call it the Great Cave of the Sleeping Lady. The name refers to a princess from the ancient kingdom of Tham Luang. According to a local Buddhist legend, the princess fell in love with a commoner, which was absolutely not allowed, so they kept it a secret until she got pregnant. Worried that her father was going to literally kill her, she ran into the cave to hide, because the cave is huge and there were plenty of places to hide in there. Her plan was to wait in the cave until her lover joined her, but he never arrived. The king's soldiers found him and executed him before he could reach her. And when she eventually realized that she was never going to see him again, she ended her own life. And ever since then, the princess's spirit watches over the cave as a Jiao Thi, or guardian spirit. Locals often say a prayer to her before they enter the cave to ask for protection, because there's a lot to need protection from. On top of the obvious things like, head bumps and ankle twists and potential falling rock, that kind of thing, there's also just the sheer scale of this cave. It's complex and it's winding, and it kind of causes you to want to see the next thing around the corner and the next chamber and the next until at some point you turn around and you have no idea where you are. And then there's the water. Flooding is a known problem in the cave. In fact, when I said that the locals call it the Great Cave of the Sleeping Lady, that's actually a shortened translation. It literally translates to the Great Cave and Water Source of the Sleep Lady Mountain. The mountain is the Kun Nam Ning Nan Mountain, which sits on top of the cave, and the water source is the mountain itself. It's made of limestone, which is very porous, so when it rains, that water collects into these tiny little channels that flow into bigger channels that eventually dump into the cave system. In fact, that's how the cave was formed, all that rushing water kind of carving it out through the years. And as you can imagine, it rains a lot in Thailand, especially in the monsoon season. Monsoon season officially starts in July, and at that point, any random rainstorm can immediately fill the cave with up to 5 meters of water. So when the boys and their coach entered the cave on June 23rd, they were kind of pushing it, but they probably thought that they were safe because monsoon season hadn't officially started yet. I feel like I should stress that while, this cave could be dangerous, it was also a popular local spot. There were lots of traditions around it. That was why they were going in, that whole tradition of writing their names on the wall for their birthday. And the weather was clear outside when they went in. They had no idea that this freak storm was about to hit. So they went in the cave, they signed their name, they did the thing, and then started exploring a little. They probably went a little further than they should have, the call of the void and whatnot, but then the water started to rise. Quickly. When they realized what was happening, they headed to the mouth of the cave to get out of there, but unfortunately the mouth of the cave is actually lower in elevation than where they were, meaning the closer they got to the mouth of the cave, the higher the water rose. It eventually got up over their heads and it filled the chamber completely, so in order to keep from drowning, they had to go further into the cave toward higher ground. Thankfully, they found a ledge that was just over 37 meters higher than the mouth of the cave. But beyond that was a dead end. They were safe, for now, but they were stuck in that spot. So they waited, in the dark, hoping that the waters would recede. They didn't. Hours passed. Eventually, the hunger pains got to them, so they shared what, meager snacks they had on them. They picked a spot to use for the bathroom, just kind of prepared to be there for a while. And then a full day went by. The coach led the kids to sing songs together and tell stories to pass the time and maybe keep their spirits up. As they entered the second day, the gravity of the situation began to dawn on them. It might be a long time, maybe weeks, before the water goes down. And did anybody know where they are? Surely their parents are looking for them, but do they know they're in the cave? Is anybody coming? They had no way of knowing. Indeed, there were people looking for them. Lots of people. Their parents discovered the bikes at the mouth of the cave within hours of them being trapped, and word spread fast. Local authorities sought the help of the Thai military, who sent a team of Navy SEALs to search for the boys. Search and rescue teams scoured the mountainside looking for possibly another way into the cave, ultimately to no avail. It was up to the Navy SEAL divers to just go in through the front, and within 24 hours they began searching the cave. It did not go well. For one thing, they ran into surprisingly strong currents inside this cave, currents that could throw the divers off course for hours at a time and even rip their face masks right off their face. In fact, 3 of the divers went missing for an entire day and had to be rushed to the hospital for oxygen deprivation. But there was a bigger problem. These guys were some of the best and most experienced divers in the country, but they were trained for and they worked in open water. They weren't trained for cave diving. And cave diving it's a whole other monster. It's obviously more cramped and it's more claustrophobic. There are stalactites and rocks that your gear can get caught on. And there's no surfacing if something goes wrong. Like, there is no surface. But the worst part, and this is something you gotta keep in mind for this entire story, the water in this cave was extremely muddy. Like, there was almost zero visibility. The only way forward was just kind of feel your way through. And the only way out was to hold onto a guideline, which would just disappear from existence if you ever lost your grip on it. By far the biggest barrier that these Thai Navy SEALs faced was psychological. They were expert swimmers, they knew their gear inside and out, but in this cave, even the slightest misstep can leave you with no idea where you are, you don't even know which way is up and down, and that can lead to panic. And a panic diver is a dead diver. Seriously, cave divers are absolute lunatics. I will never understand what drives a person to do this. But I guess it's a good thing for these kids that there are people out there that enjoy doing this stuff, and they came out of the woodwork to help, including some guys who had actually gone cave diving in that very cave. One of those lunatics was a British cave diver named Vernon Unsworth, who lived nearby and he had experience in the Tham Luang cave. He volunteered immediately and helped to provide information about the layout of the cave and help coordinate the effort. And when he saw how inexperienced these SEALs were with cave diving, he realized that, they needed some more expert cave divers in there. So he called in some fellow cave divers, including John Valanthan, Rich Stanton, and Robert Harper. Meanwhile, a rescue team began pumping out the water to try to get those wild currents under control. And with those pumps working and now a team of experts in the cave, they began making some progress, just methodically searching through the cave for the boys. Now, there were various dry chambers along the way that were above the water level, and as they reached them, they used those to set up like base camps and holding areas, and then support teams would come in behind them and follow up with supplies like oxygen tanks. But the expert divers continued forward in shifts, kind of sharing the areas that they had searched to form a map. And just to put yourself in the space that these divers were working in, again, this water was so muddy that even with lights on the forehead, they could only see like a few inches in front of their face. They had to literally feel their way through this. And they had no idea at this point if the boys were even alive. For all they knew, at any moment, a dead body would just suddenly appear floating in front of them. And the likelihood of that grew with each passing day. It just sounds like a horror movie. Back on their dry landing, the boys were now entering their 10th day. None of them had eaten for nearly a week, and they stayed hydrated by licking the walls to collect like condensation and rainwater. Ironically, the water that trapped them was far too muddy to actually drink. During those 10 days, they did actually try to dig their way out with rocks and metal items that they had on hand, and they actually managed to dig a hole about 5 meters deep, but it eventually became obvious that it was a waste of time. I can't imagine what frame of mind these kids must have been in at this point. They had tried to dig their way out. It was a waste of time. They had been there for 10 days. They hadn't eaten in over a week. There was no contact with anybody. They were in total darkness. No food. Their clothes were starting to hang off their bodies, and there was no way out of this. And I can't imagine the joy they must have felt when one of them noticed a faint glow in the water. I imagine the first one that saw it didn't believe what he was seeing. He probably thought it was a hallucination. But the lights got brighter and closer, and finally, against all hope, 2 divers poked their heads out of the water. It was John Valanthan and Rich Stanton.
How many of you? 13? Yeah, 13. Brilliant.
This morning, new video showing those 12 boys and their coach trapped deep within a cave in Thailand.
Today, when an official announced our younger brothers have been found.
Against all odds, rescuers in Thailand have found 12 missing boys.
After 10 days in total darkness, now smiles and gestures of thanks.
The celebrations were rapturous, especially amongst the families. But it was short-lived. The kids were found 2.5 miles into the cave, or 4 kilometers. Even with the path marked out, it took 4 to 5 hours each way just to reach them, through extremely narrow passages that were actually so tight that the divers had to remove their oxygen tanks just so they could squeeze through. The difficulty of getting these kids out became apparent immediately. This was going to be an ordeal. So they had 3 options to consider. All of them were terrible. Option 1, they could drill down to them from above. Now that they could pinpoint where the kids were, they thought maybe they had a shot at drilling down from above and pulling them out, which is similar to how they rescued the Chilean miners from 8 years earlier. This got ruled out pretty quickly because, again, there was a whole mountain above them. They would have had to drill down 1.2 kilometers. It would have taken way too long to get to them, and the space that they were in was so small, it was kind of too risky, they could come down and hurt one of them. And there was also the risk of disrupting some of those water channels that flow through the rock and actually send more water down into the chamber. The second option was to give the boys a crash course in scuba diving and have them swim out with the divers. But again, this was a very treacherous journey that was too challenging for even highly trained Navy SEALs in prime physical shape. These were kids who had never scuba dived in their lives and haven't eaten in 10 days. If they slipped into a panic for even a second, it would be over for them. It was just way too risky. And the last option was to just wait it out. They'd already been getting supplies and high-calorie food to the boys. Maybe they could hold out until the water subsided. But the waters weren't subsiding, and the rain wasn't letting up. In fact, it was projected to get a lot worse. Monsoon season came early this year. They could be stuck there for 4 or 5 months, which, if they kept getting food and water, that might be doable, but there was something else that they were running out of. Oxygen. The oxygen level in the chamber had already dipped down below 15%, which is getting into the danger zone. They didn't have months to spare. And besides, this would take a constant flow of food and supplies to keep these boys alive, and every single dive they took was a risk. A fact that was punctuated on July 6th.
Breaking news now, a Thai Navy SEAL died delivering supplies to a soccer team trapped in a cave.
A Thai rescuer died Thursday night from lack of oxygen.
A Thai Navy SEAL diver has died.
With more rain in the forecast and dropping oxygen levels and the threat of more deaths, the pressure was on to get those boys out of there. And going out the way they came in was the only option. But how? This is where I do have to talk about the whole Elon Musk thing. When the news of the rescue went viral, he had a team of SpaceX engineers kind of try to solve the problem, and they came up with this mini submarine that they made out of a Falcon 9 liquid oxygen transfer tube. It was this tiny little pressurized capsule that the kids could just, barely fit in, and they could breathe normally while they transferred them out of there. It wasn't the dumbest idea. Apparently he'd had some exchanges with one of the diver consultants who told him that, might as well give it a try. So they built it, and then he actually personally flew out to Thailand with it. But once they got there, the dive team realized that there was no way it could work. It was just too big. It wouldn't fit through some of those narrow spaces. Remember the space that was so small they had to take off their oxygen tank to fit through it? Yeah, it never would have gotten through there. And then Vernon Unsworth called the whole thing a PR stunt, and then Elon responded by calling him a totally normal stuff. But that whole circus aside, the problem was still, how do you prevent these kids from panicking? Which, by the way, wouldn't just put their lives at risk, but the divers that were with them as well. Somewhere along the way, an idea had been floated around that maybe they can't have a panic attack if they're not awake. One of these divers was an anesthesiologist named Dr. Richard Harris. He worked with a veterinarian named Dr. Craig Challen, who was also a diver, and they suggested that a dose of ketamine could render the boys unconscious for the dive. This was unheard of and had never been tried before. The divers would not only have to traverse this dangerous cave system, but do it while towing an unconscious kid along with them, all the while monitoring the kids' oxygen levels, make sure they're breathing. But the worst part was that both the ketamine and the oxygen would run out before they got out of the cave, so they were going to have to find places to re-administer the shot and replace the oxygen tanks, all in near zero visibility. This was nuts, and the likelihood of getting all the kids out alive was very small. But the chance that they lose all of them was rising by the day, so they put their plan into action. The first thing they needed to do was make sure that the masks and the equipment would fit the kids. An American team had actually provided diving equipment for the trapped kids, but they were all adult size. So they were actually testing the air masks on local child volunteers at a swimming pool, and they found that masks would work as long as they pulled the straps as tightly as possible. And by the way, they used positive pressure masks so that if the mask did lose the seal, no water would rush in. Once the boys were knocked out, they'd need to secure their arms and legs to keep them from, getting caught on rocks and stalactites. So they would do this by tying their feet together and their hands behind their backs using zip ties. They also made the decision to strap the boys onto a plastic stretcher called a sked. This not only kept them from floating around in the water, it would also protect the kids from jagged rocks and, prevent further injury. And by the way, they didn't just have to worry about underwater stuff. Like, that's what people talk about the most with this whole rescue, but they also had, pretty long stretches of dry cave to traverse. And they had to figure out a safe way to carry the kids through that too. This alone was no small feat. I mean, it was very rocky, uneven surface filled with slick spots and tight turns. So they MacGyvered a series of solutions. They devised teams of 8 crew members that would carry the sked through the cave, and crews also set up these kind of water slides with water hoses so that they could just glide the boy across the surface. They even built zip lines in some sections of the cave that they could just suspend the stretchers from and push them along without having to deal with the ground at all. And they also brought in rafts that they could put the stretchers on top of and just kind of float it on top where there's an underwater river. So with all the pieces in place, on July 8th, the decision was made to start bringing the kids out. And the divers made their final preparations. Part of those preparations, by the way, was they got assurances from the regional governor that they wouldn't be held liable if it didn't work and the kids drowned. All they needed was one brave boy to go first. Now, weirdly, I couldn't find exactly which boy went out first. I'm sure that information exists out there somewhere, but we do know how they chose which boys would go first. And it's kind of surprising, and even funny. So the dive team did let the boys decide who would go first. And you might think that they would maybe choose the weakest to go first because they'd need the most medical attention, but doctors had actually been in the cave with them since they'd been found, so they were treating them that whole time. They were doing relatively well. Or you might think they'd pick the strongest to go out first so that it would give them the best chance for success, which would have been a huge morale boost, and let's face it, it would have been good for PR. But no, the team chose based on who lived the furthest away from the cave. Here's why. The assistant coach, Ekapal Chathawan, who went by Coach Eek, he later said this in an interview. We were thinking when we get out of the cave, we would have to ride a bicycle home. So the persons who lived the furthest away would be allowed to go first so that they could go out and tell everybody that we were inside and that we were okay. We put the hopes on them to tell the families that we were coming out and to prepare food. Yeah, it seems that the divers purposefully didn't tell the kids just how big of an operation this whole thing was, that it was worldwide news, probably just to keep them calm. But I guess to them, they thought that there were just a handful of divers that were helping them out. And they thought that when they got out of the cave, they would have to ride their bikes home. It's kind of mind-blowing to me. Regardless, they made their choice, and they picked 4 kids to go in the first batch of rescues, with each of them leaving about 45 minutes apart. And on July 8th, 17 days after they walked in, the first group of boys exited the cave.
Great news about the rescue operation to save members of that young soccer team and their coach.
A team of divers helped the 4 young boys navigate a treacherous path out of the cave.
4 of the players were brought to safety just a few hours ago in what's been a complicated and risky operation.
These 4 boys now out of the cave after 16 very long days.
The next day, another group of 4 were extricated from the cave, each journey taking over 5 hours to reach the outside. In all, it took 3 days of nonstop work and dedication to get all the soccer team out of the cave, and miraculously, every last one survived. It wasn't without its hiccups, though. Yeah, in one case, a diver's hand had slipped off the guide rope, and he couldn't find it again. Like I said, if you lose track of it, it's gone. So he actually got a little turned around and accidentally circled back to a previous cavern before he could get himself back on track. This caused his oxygen level to get dangerously low, but they did survive. And apparently the last of the kids to go out was actually the smallest of the team, and the face mask didn't fit him properly. So they had to use extra straps and kind of figure out a way to force it onto his face, which worked, thankfully, but yeah, if that strap had come undone, that kid would have drowned. So with the last kid and the coach finally out, the world gave a sigh of relief. But the danger wasn't over for the rescuers. Yeah, while they were still in the process of removing the equipment and the infrastructure they built up in one of the, interior base camps, the water pump suddenly failed. And this sent a rush of water going back into the cave. One of the Navy SEALs, who was just 800 meters away from the mouth of the cave, he didn't have any scuba gear or any way to breathe underwater, and suddenly the water started rising all the way up to his chest, and he and a few other crew members had to, scramble to higher ground. Fortunately, they did get the pump working again, and all the remaining crew members made it out safely. So by July 10th, the rescue operation was over, everybody was out safe, and the team spent about a month in the hospital before returning to their families. The Tham Luang cave rescue was nothing short of a miracle. Even the dive team who planned the rescue had kind of prepared themselves for the possibility of losing at least one of the boys. But I guess the spirit of the princess was working overtime that day. It wasn't without its tragedy, though. As I mentioned before, Samam Kunan died while trying to save the kids. And by the way, he was a retired Navy SEAL at that point. He was just working as a security guard at the airport. But he left his job to come volunteer and help save them. And he lost his life in the process. Today there's a statue memorializing him at the entrance to the cave, along with a museum dedicated to the rescue. There was also one other diver who contracted a blood infection from the cave waters, and he later succumbed to his illness, which puts the official death toll at 2 people. The Tham Luang cave remained closed for almost 5 months, and when it reopened, it became a major tourist attraction. More than 1 million people visited the national park that houses the cave in just the first month after its reopening. And it's still a popular tourist spot to this day. Following the rescue, there were some who were critical of Coach Eek for leading the boys into the cave. Some have even called for, pressing charges against him, but the boys' families totally had his back. They credit him for keeping them alive those 10 days before they were found. He was actually a former monk, and he taught them meditation to regulate their fear and told them stories to keep their spirits up. So, in the end, for the most part, he came out a hero. After the rescue, the Thai Navy SEALs added cave diving to their training so that they wouldn't be caught on their heels the next time this happened. Since then, all the boys have finished school and are out there living their lives, with one exception. This story does have a tragic addendum here. In 2023, the team captain took his own life. Now, it'd be easy to blame that on this event and the PTSD it may have given him or something like that, but we really don't know. It's very sad. Several movies have been made about the daring rescue, including 13 Lives, directed by Ron Howard, and a Netflix limited series called Thai Cave Rescue that goes into a bit more detail. There's also been a number of studies and papers published about the Thai cave rescue. In 2022, a research paper in the Journal of Bioethical Inquiry examined the ethical and moral challenges of administering general anesthesia the way they did in emergency response operations. The Journal of Management Injury published a paper just last year on a research study conducted by the University of Quebec that looked at the leadership structure of the rescue. The study coined a term known as the Rudolph effect, showing how providing support for unconventional team members with unique skills can elevate them to higher leadership positions. That's right, the person in the office who keeps insisting in meetings that an espresso machine and a cereal bar can improve productivity may not just be too cheap to buy their own breakfast. They could be the next leader of your industry. It felt like the whole world watched every single minute of this thing. They defied the odds that seemed stacked against them from the very beginning. But I love stories like this. Just thousands of people coming together to help a bunch of strangers. Just people being good for once. More of that, please. The bravery of these guys is beyond words. I mean, they unselfishly put their lives on the line to save these kids. Especially in the early days when they had no idea if they were even alive in there. They went in anyway. It's just remarkable. I'm not made of that kind of stuff. But I would argue that it wasn't bravery that saved these kids. It was problem solving. It was the laying of the guideline. It was figuring out where the air pockets were and then using those to create way stations where they could switch out tanks. It was figuring out how much air they would need to get from one way station to the other. It was figuring out how to get the tanks to the way stations. I mean, it was logistics beyond words. And I should point out, it wasn't just to save those kids' lives, but to protect their own. Problem solving is a human superpower. And Brilliant uses that superpower to superpower your learning. Brilliant is an online learning platform and app that teaches you math, science, and engineering skills in a way that you won't find anywhere else, through problem solving. Instead of making you memorize a bunch of facts and figures, Brilliant works more like a game, and it uses a different part of your mind to solve puzzles. And by solving these problems, you learn it in a way that makes it stick. Take their popular logic course. It walks you through a series of puzzles with robots to kind of help you deduce an answer with as little data as possible. It also helps you navigate logic traps and spot logical fallacies and misrepresentations. Feels like that's a good thing to know these days. But just like any other courses, you can start as basic or advanced as you want, and they'll walk you through the levels of thinking until you kind of can't believe you're understanding this stuff. Whether it's boning up on science and math stuff that maybe you struggle with in school, to learning cutting-edge programming and AI. Brilliant is amazing, and the best part of it all is it doesn't actually feel like learning. It's just fun. Like, think about how much time you spend playing little games on your phone or whatever. Like, you could be spending that time learning things, and it's just as fun. If you want to give it a try for free, just go to brilliant.org/answerswithjoe or just scan the QR code here on the screen. And if you decide to try for the premium subscription that gives you unlimited access to everything, Brilliant's offering my viewers 20% off the annual subscription. It would only be logical to take advantage of that. Anyway, I think you'll enjoy it. Links down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. If this is your first time watching one of these, welcome. Thank you for watching my channel. I'll put a little thing up here. You can go check that one out, or you can go look at any of the sidebar if you're watching on your computer, and any other videos that have my face and my name on them. I invite you to go check them out. And if you like them, I invite you to subscribe, because I just keep making these things. Please do like and share this video if you like. If you've got a comment, if you've been to the Tham Luang cave, if you know something that maybe I missed, please drop it down below. If you are a cave diver, first of all, what's wrong with you? Tell us what's wrong with you in the comments. But I'll leave you with that for today. You guys go out there, have an eye-opening rest of the week, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Love you guys. Take care. Also, by the way, if any of you have noticed that there's this weird spot on my forehead, I talk about it in a TMI video. I'll link it down below. But I'm fine. You don't need to worry about me.